The waitress arrived to work at a luxury party in the Millionaire'S mansion and froze when she saw her photo in a black frame. The crystal chandelier above Anna Collins cast dancing shadows across the marble floor as she balanced another tray of champagne flutes, her worn sneakers silent against the opulent surface of the Davenport mansion. At 23, she'd worked enough high-end events to know the difference between real luxury and the kind that screamed for attention. This place, this was old money elegance that whispered its power. "Anna, take these to the study." Marcus, the event coordinator, thrust a silver tray toward her. "Mr. Davenport's expecting some business associates there in 20 minutes. She nodded, grateful for any task that kept her moving. Standing still in places like this made her too aware of the contrast. Her black polyester uniform against Italian marble, her calloused hands serving crystal that cost more than her monthly rent. But hey, the pay was good, and Mom's medical bills weren't getting any smaller. The hallway leading to Edward Davenport's private study stretched longer than her entire apartment. Oil paintings of stern-faced ancestors watched her progress, their eyes seeming to follow each step. Anna had always been good at reading people, a skill that served her well in the service industry. But the portraits made her skin crawl in a way she couldn't explain. She paused outside the heavy mahogany door, adjusting her grip on the tray. Through the gap beneath, warm light spilled out, and she could hear the low murmur of voices inside. Taking a breath, she knocked gently. "Come in." The voice was deep, commanding, exactly what she'd expect from Dallas's most powerful real estate mogul. Anna pushed open the door and immediately understood why they called Edward Davenport the King of Dallas society. Even at 58, he commanded attention. Silver hair perfectly styled, eyes the color of winter storm clouds, wearing a suit that probably cost more than she made in 3 months. He was standing near floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a panoramic view of the city lights below, speaking quietly with 2 other men in expensive suits. "Just set it on the side table, please," he said, without looking at her, continuing his conversation about some development project in Deep Ellum. Anna moved carefully across the room, hyper-aware of every sound her footsteps might make on the Persian rug. The study was a temple to success. Leather-bound books, awards, photographs with governors and senators. But as she set down the tray, something else caught her eye. Along the far wall, draped in black silk, was what looked like a memorial altar. Her hands trembled slightly as she arranged the champagne glasses. She shouldn't look. She should finish her job and leave. But something drew her gaze back to that wall like a magnet. Framed photographs covered a small table beneath the black fabric. Children's faces smiled back at her. Some formal school portraits, others candid shots of kids playing, laughing. It was beautiful and heartbreaking at the same time, clearly a tribute to lost young lives. Anna was about to look away when her world tilted off its axis. There, in a silver frame near the center, was a photograph she recognized with bone-deep certainty. A baby picture. Herself as an infant, maybe 6 months old, wearing a pink dress she'd seen in her mother's old photo album. But that was impossible. Why would Edward Davenport have her baby picture on a memorial wall? Her pulse hammered in her ears as she looked closer. Next to her photo was another baby picture. A boy in a blue outfit who looked exactly like her. Identical. The kind of identical you only see in twins. Jacob, the brother she'd been told died when they were 2 years old. But the brass nameplate beneath the photos made her blood run cold. Jacob Collins, 1999, 2015. Jacob had lived until he was 16. Not died as a toddler like Mom had always said. The champagne glasses clinked as her hands shook uncontrollably. This couldn't be real. This had to be some sick coincidence, some mistake. But the baby in the blue outfit had her eyes, her nose, her mouth, and the date. "Excuse me, miss." Anna spun around, her face flushed, probably looking guilty as hell. Edward Davenport was staring at her with those cold gray eyes, his business associates now gone. "I'm sorry, Mr. Davenport. I was just... The photographs are beautiful." Her voice sounded strange, distant. He moved closer, studying her face with an intensity that made her want to run. "You look familiar. Have we met before?" "No, sir. I just work for the catering company." She backed toward the door, desperate to escape before she fell apart completely. "Will there be anything else you need? What's your name?" The question hung in the air like a loaded gun. Anna's mouth went dry. "Anna, sir. Anna Collins." Something flickered in his eyes. Recognition. Satisfaction. Something that made her stomach clench with dread. "Collins," he repeated slowly, as if tasting the name. "That's interesting." She needed to leave now. "If you'll excuse me, I should get back to work." "Of course, thank you, Anna." The way he said her name sent ice through her veins. She managed a nod and fled the study, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might burst. The rest of the evening passed in a blur. Anna served drinks, collected empty plates, and smiled at guests while her mind raced in circles. By the time she finally made it home to their small apartment in Oak Cliff, she felt like she might throw up. "How was work, sweetheart?" Mary Collins looked up from her oxygen tank, her once beautiful face gaunt from years of illness. At 48, she looked a decade older, the weight of secrets and sickness having carved deep lines around her eyes. Anna stood in the doorway, studying her mother's face, really looking at her for the first time in years. "Mom, I need to ask you something, and I need you to tell me the truth." Mary's expression immediately grew guarded. "What's wrong? You look like you've seen a ghost." "Maybe I have." Anna sat down heavily on their worn couch. "I was working at Edward Davenport's house tonight." The color drained from Mary's face so quickly Anna thought she might faint. Her mother's hands started shaking, and she reached for her inhaler. "Mom, we should talk." Mary's voice was barely a whisper. "I've been dreading this day for 23 years. Anna felt the last piece of her normal life crumble away. "Jacob didn't die when we were 2, did he?" Tears spilled down Mary's cheeks as she shook her head. "No, baby, he didn't." "Then where is he?" "Mom, where is my brother?" Mary closed her eyes as if the words physically hurt to speak. "He's been living with Edward Davenport this whole time, as Jacob Davenport." The room spun around Anna as the full implications hit her. Her twin brother, her other half, was alive, had been alive all this time, living in luxury while she and Mom struggled in poverty. And somehow, Edward Davenport was connected to all of it. "Why?" The word came out as a broken whisper. "Because 25 years ago," Mary said through her tears, "I made the biggest mistake of my life. I fell in love with Edward Davenport." Anna stared at her mother, the words hanging between them like a death sentence. "You fell in love with Edward Davenport." Her voice cracked on his name. "The man who has Jacob's picture on a memorial wall." Mary struggled to her feet. Moving to the small window that overlooked their neighborhood of cramped apartments and chain-link fences, the contrast with the Davenport mansion couldn't have been starker. "I was 25, Mary began, her voice distant with memory, working as a receptionist at Davenport Development. Edward was 33, this golden boy heir who'd just taken over from his father. He was, God, Anna, he was everything I thought I wanted. Handsome, powerful, charming when he wanted to be. Anna felt sick. But he was engaged to Caroline Hughes, wasn't he? I read about their marriage in the society pages when I was researching tonight. He was engaged, yes, but he said it was just business, that his father arranged it to merge their companies. He told me he loved me, that after the wedding he'd find a way to divorce Caroline and we'd be together. Mary's laugh was bitter. I was so naive. I actually believed him. So you had an affair. For 8 months, we'd meet at hotels, at his penthouse when Caroline was out of town. He made me feel like I was the only woman in the world. And when I got pregnant, Mary turned back to face Anna, tears streaming down her face. He was furious, absolutely livid. Anna's hands clenched into fists. What did he say? That I was trying to trap him, that I was just another gold digger looking for a payday. He offered to pay for an abortion, and when I refused, he said he'd never acknowledge the babies, and that if I ever tried to contact him again, he'd destroy me. The cruelty of it made Anna's chest tight with rage. But you had us anyway. I couldn't give you up. I got fired from Davenport Development. Of course, blacklisted from every decent job in Dallas. But I worked 3 jobs while I was pregnant, saved every penny I thought. I thought if I could just prove I didn't need his money, maybe someday. What changed? Anna asked quietly. Why did he take Jacob? Mary sank back into her chair, looking older than her 48 years. When you 2 were babies, we were living in this terrible apartment in South Dallas. No heat, roaches, barely scraping by. I was working nights at a diner and days cleaning offices. Mrs. Rodriguez next door watched you both when I was gone. Anna had vague memories of Mrs. Rodriguez, a kind elderly woman who always smelled like vanilla and spoke in rapid Spanish. Then one day, Edward showed up at our door. You were 2 years old, both of you. He looked around that tiny, horrible apartment and said he'd come to make me an offer I couldn't refuse. What kind of offer? He said he'd take one of you, just one, and raise that child as his own. Give them every advantage money could buy, the best schools, the best clothes, opportunities I could never provide, but Mary's voice broke completely. But the other twin would stay with me as a reminder of what I'd lost, and if I ever tried to contact him or the child he took, or if I ever told anyone the truth, I'd never see my child again. Anna felt like she might throw up. That's monstrous. Why didn't you call the police? With what evidence he was Edward Davenport? I was nobody, a poor single mother with a history of mental health issues, which he made sure everyone knew about after I had postpartum depression. Who would believe me? Mary wiped her eyes with a tissue. And Anna, you have to understand. We were starving, literally. You both were underweight, getting sick constantly. I couldn't afford medicine when you had ear infections. I couldn't even afford shoes that fit. The weight of her mother's impossible choice settled over Anna like a suffocating blanket. So you let him take Jacob. He said he'd flip a coin to decide which one he'd take. Heads for Jacob, tails for you. Mary's voice was barely a whisper. It came up heads. Anna imagined that moment. Her mother watching a coin spin in the air, deciding which of her children would grow up in luxury and which would grow up in poverty. The randomness of it was almost as cruel as the choice itself. He also gave me $50,000 and made me sign papers saying I'd given Jacob up for adoption voluntarily. Said if I kept quiet and stayed away, he'd make sure Jacob was taken care of. If I didn't, she shuddered. He showed me pictures of what happened to other people who crossed him. Business rivals who'd lost everything. Former employees who couldn't find work anywhere. Edward Davenport doesn't just win. He destroys. But why keep my picture on that memorial wall? Why pretend Jacob is dead? I think it's his twisted sense of justice. To him, the children we were died that day. Jacob became his creation. Jacob Davenport, heir to an empire, and you? Mary looked at her daughter with heartbreaking sadness. You became my punishment, a constant reminder of what I'd lost. Anna stood abruptly, pacing to the kitchen and back. The tiny apartment felt even smaller now, pressing in on her from all sides. I need air. I need to think. Anna, please don't do anything reckless. Edward is dangerous, more dangerous than you can imagine. But Anna was already grabbing her jacket. I'll be back later. I need to process this. She drove aimlessly through Dallas, eventually finding herself at Parkland Hospital where she'd started her nursing program. The familiar sounds and smells were comforting somehow. Beeping machines, antiseptic, the constant hum of people helping people. Anna, a warm voice called her name. What are you doing here so late? She turned to see Dr. Samuel Brooks walking toward her. At 32, he was one of the youngest department heads at Parkland, with kind brown eyes and an easy smile that made patients trust him instantly. He'd been Mom's pulmonologist for the past year, and Anna had always felt comfortable around him. Hi, Dr. Brooks, My mom had some questions about her medication, and I thought I'd swing by. The lie came easily, but Samuel's expression suggested he wasn't buying it. Anna, you look like you've been crying. Is everything okay? Is Mary all right? Something about his genuine concern broke through her defenses. Before she knew it, she was telling him everything. The memorial wall, the photos, her mother's confession. She couldn't explain why she trusted him, but the words poured out like water from a broken dam. Samuel listened without interruption, his face growing more troubled with each detail. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. Anna, I need to ask you something, and I want you to think carefully before you answer. Have you ever noticed that you and Jacob Davenport look alike? The question caught her off guard. Jacob Davenport? I've never met him. Why would you ask that? Samuel hesitated, clearly wrestling with something. I've seen him at hospital fundraisers. He's involved with the board of directors through his father's foundation, and the resemblance between you two is remarkable. I mean, Really remarkable. A chill ran down Anna's spine. What are you saying? I'm saying that if what your mother told you is true, there might be a way to prove it, scientifically, I mean. But Anna, he reached out and touched her arm gently. Are you sure you want to know the truth? Sometimes knowledge comes with a price we're not prepared to pay. Looking into his concerned eyes, Anna felt something shift inside her. For the first time in her life, someone was offering to help her find answers instead of protecting her from them. I need to know, she said firmly. I've lived with lies long enough. Samuel nodded slowly. Then we'll find out together, but we'll be careful. Very careful. 20 miles across Dallas, in a penthouse that overlooked the glittering skyline, Jacob Davenport stood before floor-to-ceiling windows, his reflection ghost-like in the glass. At 23, he possessed the kind of cold confidence that came from never having wanted for anything, except perhaps a mother's love. The Riverside Project numbers are in, he said into his phone, his voice carrying the same commanding tone as his father's. Tell Morrison we're not budging on price if he can't handle the terms. We'll find someone who can. He ended the call and loosened his Italian silk tie, finally allowing himself to relax. The Davenport Industries executive suite was empty except for him. He preferred working late. When the building was quiet and he could think without interruption, a soft knock interrupted his thoughts. Come in. Edward Davenport entered, carrying 2 glasses of whiskey. Macallan 25, the same brand they'd shared every Friday evening since Jacob turned 18. It was their tradition, their bonding time, though Jacob had never felt particularly close to the man who'd saved him from poverty. How did the Miller acquisition meeting go? Edward asked, settling into one of the leather chairs. They'll sign by Monday. They don't have a choice. Jacob accepted the whiskey and sat across from his father. Their debt load is too high to refuse our offer. Edward smiled with satisfaction. You're becoming ruthless. I'm proud of that. The word proud should have warmed Jacob, but it never did. Nothing Edward said ever filled the hollow space in his chest where a family's love should have lived. He'd been grateful, certainly. Edward had given him everything money could buy. The best schools, designer clothes, luxury cars, a guaranteed place in one of Dallas's most powerful companies. But gratitude wasn't love, and Jacob had learned early not to confuse the two. Tell me again about before, Jacob said suddenly, surprising them both. It wasn't like him to revisit the past. Edward's expression grew carefully neutral. Before what? Before you adopted me. About Mary Collins. The name hung in the air like a curse. Edward's jaw tightened, the way it always did when Jacob brought up his birth mother. Jacob, we've been through this. That woman abandoned you and your sister, left you both in squalor while she chased after men and drugs. Your sister died because of her negligence, and you nearly did too. I saved you from that life. Jacob had heard the story countless times, but tonight it felt different. Maybe it was the way Edward's eyes shifted when he said, "Sister died." Or maybe it was the fact that Jacob had never seen any proof of his twin's death. No birth certificate, no death record, nothing. What was her name? My sister. Anna, Edward said quickly, then seemed to regret it. But dwelling on the past won't change anything, son. The Collins family brought nothing but misery. You're a Davenport now. That's all that matters. Anna. The name echoed in Jacob's mind like a melody he couldn't forget. Sometimes, late at night, he thought he could remember her, the warmth of another small body next to his, shared laughter, identical faces looking back from mirrors. But Edward had always told him those were fantasies, trauma-induced memories of toys or imaginary friends. I want to see the adoption papers, Jacob said. Edward's glass stopped halfway to his lips. What? The adoption papers? Medical records? Something official that proves the story you've told me? Jacob, what's brought this on? You've never questioned. I'm questioning now. Jacob leaned forward, his voice taking on the steel edge he used in business negotiations. I've built my entire identity around being grateful for being saved from Mary Collins. Don't you think I deserve to see proof of what I was saved from? Edward was quiet for a long moment, studying his adopted son with calculating eyes. The records were sealed. Privacy laws, you understand, to protect you from having to relive that trauma. Unseal them. It's not that simple. You're Edward Davenport. You've never met a law you couldn't bend or a record you couldn't access. If you wanted those files, you'd have them by tomorrow morning. The tension in the room was thick enough to cut. Edward set down his whiskey and moved to the windows, his back to Jacob. Some stones are better left unturned, son. That's not an answer. Edward turned around, and for just a moment, Jacob saw something he'd never seen in his adoptive father's eyes. Fear. The Collins woman was disturbed, Jacob. Mentally ill. If you start digging into that past, you might not like what you find. And more importantly, she might find out you're looking. She's still alive, as far as I know, but she signed away all parental rights. She has no claim on you, and you have no obligation to her. She made her choice 21 years ago. Jacob felt a strange mixture of relief and anger. His birth mother was alive, but she'd willingly given him up. The abandonment stung, even after all these years. What about other family? Aunts, uncles, grandparents? None that matter. The Collins family tree is full of addiction, mental illness, and failure. You're better off not knowing them. But Jacob's mind was racing. If Mary Collins was alive, if there were other relatives, why had Edward worked so hard to keep them a secret? Why seal records that would only confirm what a good deed Edward had done by adopting him? I think I'll hire a private investigator, Jacob said casually. Watching Edward's reaction carefully, the older man's face went white. Jacob, that would be incredibly unwise. These people could try to extort money from you, claim you owe them something, or worse, they could fabricate some story to try to damage our family's reputation. Our family's reputation. The Davenport name means something in this city. We've built an empire on trust and respectability. Do you really want to risk that for people who threw you away like garbage? The words hit their intended target. Jacob had always been sensitive about being unwanted, abandoned. Edward knew exactly which buttons to push. But tonight, something was different. Tonight, Jacob found himself wondering if there was more to the story. Maybe I'll start small, he said. Just see what public records show. Birth certificates, hospital records from when I was born. Edward moved closer, his voice taking on the paternal tone he used when he wanted to end discussions. Jacob, I need you to trust me on this. I've protected you from that world for 21 years. Please don't force me to show you why. Show me why. The truth about Mary Collins isn't pretty. The truth about what she did to your sister isn't something you want to carry around. Let sleeping dogs lie. But Jacob was done being protected. Done being grateful for a salvation he couldn't even verify. Done accepting other people's versions of his own life story. I'll think about it. He lied smoothly. The same way he lied to business rivals before undercutting their deals. Edward seemed to relax slightly. Good. Now, how about we talk about something more pleasant? The charity gala next week. There will be some important people there. People who could be useful to your future. They talked for another hour about business and social obligations. But Jacob's mind was elsewhere. He was already planning his next moves. Already thinking about which private investigator to hire. What Edward didn't know was that Jacob Davenport had inherited more than just business acumen from his adoptive father. He'd also learned how to be patient, how to plan, and how to get what he wanted no matter what obstacles stood in his way. By the time Edward left the penthouse, Jacob had made his decision. He was going to find Mary Collins, and he was going to learn the truth about his sister Anna. Even if that truth destroyed everything he thought he knew about himself. 2 weeks after her world had been turned upside down, Anna found herself back in the same territory that had started it all. Another high-end event. Another chance to serve Dallas's elite while invisibly moving through their world. But this time, she wasn't just working for the money. She was hunting for answers. The Dallas Children's Hospital charity auction was being held at the Adolphus Hotel, and Anna had specifically requested this assignment. She knew Jacob Davenport would be here. The Davenport Foundation was one of the event's major sponsors, and according to the society pages, Jacob never missed an opportunity to network. Anna, you're on champagne service for the VIP section, Marcus called out during the pre-event briefing. These are big donors, so smile pretty and don't spill anything expensive. She nodded, her stomach churning with nervous energy. Somewhere in this room was her twin brother, the other half of herself she'd never known. What would she feel when she saw him? Would there be some magical twin connection? Some instant recognition? The ballroom was a sea of designer gowns and $1,000 suits. The kind of crowd where a single piece of jewelry could pay Anna's rent for a year. She moved through the space with practiced invisibility, offering champagne and canapes while studying faces, looking for someone who might share her features. "Excuse me, could I get a glass of the cristal?" Anna turned toward the voice and nearly dropped her entire tray. The man standing before her was like looking into a funhouse mirror, familiar yet foreign, same yet different. He had her eyes, the exact same shade of green that she saw in her reflection every morning. Her nose, but stronger, more masculine. Her mouth, but set in harder lines. Dark hair where hers was lighter, but the same unruly wave that never quite behaved. "Of course," she managed, her voice sounding strangely distant. She selected a flute of champagne from her tray, hyper-aware of how her hands were trembling. Jacob Davenport, because this had to be him, accepted the glass with a polite nod, but his eyes lingered on her face with obvious curiosity. "Have we met before?" he asked. "You look familiar." The irony of the question almost made her laugh hysterically. "I don't think so. I'm just with the catering staff. I'm Jacob," he said, extending his hand. Jacob Davenport. The moment their hands touched, Anna felt something electric shoot through her. Not romantic, but something deeper, more primal, like puzzle pieces clicking into place after being separated for decades. "Anna," she replied, studying his reaction to her name. Would it trigger some buried memory, some subconscious recognition? Jacob's grip on her hand lingered a moment longer than necessary. "Anna, that's a beautiful name." There was something in his voice, a softness she hadn't expected from everything she'd read about the ruthless young heir. His thumb brushed across her knuckles before he released her hand, sending another jolt of that strange electric connection through her. "Thank you," she said, then forced herself to step back. This was dangerous territory. She couldn't afford to feel anything for this man. Couldn't let herself be drawn in by whatever this connection was. He was her brother, her twin brother who didn't know she existed. "Would you like me to bring you anything else?" she asked, trying to regain her professional composure. "Actually, I was wondering if you might tell me about yourself. What brings you to event work?" Anna blinked in surprise. In her 3 years of catering high-end events, wealthy clients almost never asked personal questions about the staff. They barely acknowledged their existence. "I'm putting myself through nursing school," she answered honestly. "The pay is good, and the hours are flexible." "Nursing school, that's admirable." Jacob's smile seemed genuine, not the condescending approval she sometimes got from rich people who wanted to feel good about themselves. "Which program?" Southwestern. I'm specializing in critical care." "That's impressive. And difficult, I imagine, working these events while keeping up with medical coursework." There was something about the way he spoke to her, like she was a person worth knowing, not just hired help. It was disarming and attractive in a way that made Anna's stomach twist with guilt. "It keeps me busy," she said with a smile she hoped looked casual. "What about you? Besides the obvious family business, what do you do with your time?" Jacob laughed, and the sound sent another shock of recognition through her. She knew that laugh, somehow, had heard it in dreams. Maybe, or in some distant memory. The obvious family business pretty much consumes everything. Real estate development, property management, some venture capital investments. Not as noble as saving lives, I'm afraid. Money helps save lives too, Anna pointed out. Hospital wings, medical equipment, research funding. The Davenport Foundation has probably helped more people than I ever will. Something shifted in Jacob's expression. Surprise? Maybe. That she'd defended his work rather than dismissing it. "That's generous of you to say. Most people assume it's just guilt money or tax write-offs." "Is it?" The question popped out before Anna could stop herself. She wasn't supposed to be challenging him. Wasn't supposed to be having any kind of real conversation with him at all. Jacob studied her with those familiar green eyes, and Anna felt like he could see straight through to her soul. Some of it, probably, but some of it is genuine too. Turns out having everything doesn't actually make you happy. Shocking, I know. There was something almost vulnerable in his admission, a crack in the armor of wealth and privilege. Anna felt herself leaning toward him, drawn in, despite every rational thought screaming at her to walk away. "Happiness is overrated anyway," she said, Purpose is better, longer lasting. You sound like someone who's had to find purpose the hard way. Don't we all? They stood there looking at each other, and Anna felt the strangest sense of coming home, like she'd been searching for something her entire life and had finally found it. The feeling was so intense it scared her. "I should get back to work," she said abruptly, stepping backward. "Of course. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to keep you." But as Anna moved away, she felt Jacob's eyes following her across the room, every time she glanced in his direction. He was watching her with that same curious intensity. From the shadows near the silent auction tables, Edward Davenport observed the interaction with growing satisfaction. He'd watched his son approach the Collins girl, had seen the immediate attraction spark between them. Perfect. Absolutely perfect. 23 years of careful planning, and the pieces were finally falling into place. Jacob, completely unaware that he was flirting with his own sister. Anna, clearly drawn to the brother she'd never known. Both of them walking blindly into the trap Edward had been setting since they were toddlers. He pulled out his phone and typed a quick text to his assistant. "Schedule another charity event for next month. Make sure both Collins and Jacob are there." The beauty of his revenge was its patience. He could have revealed the truth at any time over the past 2 decades. Could have destroyed Mary Collins with a single phone call. But that would have been too quick, too merciful. No. Edward wanted to watch them fall in love first. Wanted to see them become emotionally invested, physically attracted, maybe even sexually involved. And then, when they were at their most vulnerable, when they thought they'd found their soulmates, he would reveal the truth and watch it destroy them both. The sins of Mary Collins would finally be paid for, not just by her, but by the children she'd tried to keep from him. Edward finished his whiskey and smiled. The evening was going better than he'd hoped. Dr. Samuel Brooks stared at the computer screen in his office, the DNA analysis results glowing like an accusation in the fluorescent light. He'd run the test 3 times, hoping for a different outcome, but the numbers didn't lie. The genetic markers were identical, not similar, not close, but absolutely, undeniably identical. Anna Collins and Jacob Davenport were twins. His hands trembled as he reached for his coffee, nearly knocking over the framed photo of his parents on his desk. In 15 years of medicine, he'd delivered devastating diagnoses to countless families, but he'd never faced anything like this. How do you tell someone that the person they're falling in love with is their own brother? Because Anna was falling in love with Jacob. That much was obvious over the past month. Since the charity auction, she'd talked about little else. The mysterious connection she'd felt, the way Jacob had sought her out at 2 more events, how he'd started texting her after somehow getting her number from the catering company. Samuel's phone buzzed with a message from Anna. "Can we meet for coffee? I need to talk to someone about Jacob." He closed his laptop and rubbed his temples, feeling the weight of impossible knowledge. Anna trusted him, had confided in him about her search for the truth about her brother. She had no idea that she'd already found him. An hour later, Anna slid into the booth across from him at their usual coffee shop near the hospital. She looked radiant in a way that made Samuel's heart ache, the glow of someone discovering love for the first time. "He asked me out," she said without preamble, her cheeks flushed with excitement. An actual date, not just running into each other at work events. Samuel's stomach dropped. "Anna, I know what you're going to say, that he's way out of my league, that rich guys like him don't seriously date girls like me. But Sam, there's something different about him. Something that makes me feel like I've known him my whole life. Because you have," Samuel thought desperately. "He's literally part of you." "What did you tell him?" he managed to ask. "I said yes, obviously. We're having dinner tomorrow night, somewhere quiet," he said, away from the society crowd. Anna leaned forward, her eyes bright with happiness. "I think he really likes me, Sam. Not just as some fun distraction, but really likes me." Samuel felt sick. He had to say something, had to warn her somehow without revealing what he knew. "Anna, maybe you should slow down with this. There's still so much you don't know about your family situation, about Jacob's connection to—" "That's exactly why I need to see where this goes," Anna interrupted. "Jacob might be the key to understanding everything. He grew up with Edward Davenport. He might know things about my brother, about what really happened all those years ago." The irony was so painful that Samuel almost laughed. She was planning to use her brother to find information about herself, Have you told him about your twin? Samuel asked carefully. Anna shook her head. Not yet. It's too complicated to explain without getting into the whole Edward Davenport connection. But maybe someday, if we get serious, I'll tell him everything. Samuel's phone rang, saving him from having to respond. The caller ID showed Dr. Patricia Hernandez from the genetics lab. I need to take this, he said, stepping away from the table. Sam Brooks. Dr. Brooks, it's Patricia. I wanted to follow up on that DNA analysis you requested. The sample match you found? That's incredibly unusual. Are these patients related to a criminal investigation? Something like that, Samuel said vaguely. The results are accurate. Absolutely. The genetic markers are identical across all 23 chromosome pairs. These individuals are definitely monozygotic twins, but Sam, I have to ask, how did you get samples from both subjects? The paperwork only shows consent from one party. Samuel's blood ran cold. He'd taken Anna's DNA from a routine blood draw during her mother's appointment, with Anna's permission for general health screening, but Jacob's sample had come from a discarded coffee cup after a hospital fundraising meeting, completely without his knowledge or consent. That's complicated, he said. Sam, you know I have to report unauthorized genetic testing. It's not just unethical, it could cost you your license. Patricia, please, give me 24 hours to figure out how to handle this properly. These people's lives are at stake. There was a long pause. 24 hours, Sam. Then I have to file a report. He hung up and returned to the table, where Anna was scrolling through her phone with a dreamy expression. Jacob just texted me, she said, showing him the screen. He wants to pick me up at 7 tomorrow, Sam. I think this could be the start of something really important. Samuel stared at the text message. Can't wait to see you tomorrow night. There's something about you that feels like home. The cruel poetry of it. A brother and sister recognizing their connection without understanding its true nature, made Samuel feel physically ill. Anna, I need to tell you something, he started, but she was already standing up. I have to run. Mom has a doctor's appointment and I promised I'd drive her. But Sam, thank you for listening. You're the best friend I could ask for. She kissed his cheek and hurried out, leaving Samuel alone with his devastating knowledge. Meanwhile, across town in his penthouse office, Jacob was having his own crisis of conscience. The private investigator he'd hired had finally delivered results on Mary Collins, and the findings were disturbing. She's been living in poverty for over 20 years, the investigator, Tom Reynolds, reported, working multiple minimum wage jobs to support herself and a daughter named Anna. Medical records show she's been battling chronic lung disease, probably from working in industrial cleaning for years. A daughter named Anna. Jacob's heart rate spiked. Born the same day as you, according to the birth certificate I found. Hospital records show she was born first. You were born second. Twins. The room spun around Jacob. That's impossible. My sister died when we were 2. Not according to these records. Anna Collins is very much alive. In fact, she's been working as a server at high-end events around Dallas. There's a good chance you've seen her at some of the charity functions you attend. Jacob's mind raced back to the green-eyed girl from the auction, the one who'd made him feel inexplicably drawn to her. Anna, the same name as his supposedly dead sister. Do you have a photo? He asked, dreading the answer. Tom slid a surveillance photo across the desk. It was Anna at the charity auction, serving champagne with that gentle smile that had captivated Jacob from the moment he'd seen it. Jesus Christ, Jacob breathed. The woman he'd been texting, the woman he'd asked on a date, the woman he'd been fantasizing about. She was his twin sister. There's more, Tom continued. I found evidence that your father has been monitoring the Collins family for years. Bank records show he's been making anonymous payments to the hospital where Mary receives treatment. And get this, there are surveillance reports dating back decades. Your father has been watching them. Jacob felt rage building in his chest, like a pressure cooker about to explode. Edward has known this entire time that my sister was alive. It gets worse. I found sealed court documents from 1998. Your father didn't adopt you through normal channels. There's evidence of coercion, possibly extortion. Mary Collins didn't voluntarily give you up. She was forced to. The betrayal was so complete, so devastating, that Jacob couldn't process it. Everything he'd believed about his life, his identity, his family, All of it was lies. I need you to keep digging, he told Tom. I want to know every detail of what Edward did to my mother, every crime he committed, every lie he told. What about your sister? Are you going to contact her? Jacob looked at Anna's photo again, remembering the electric connection he'd felt when they'd touched, the way she'd made him feel less alone than he'd felt in years. Now he understood why. Not yet, he said. First, I need to figure out how to destroy Edward Davenport. Edward Davenport stood in his study, sipping 30-year-old scotch as he watched the security footage from the previous evening's charity auction for the third time. The way Jacob and Anna had looked at each other, the lingering handshake, the obvious attraction. It was everything he'd hoped for and more. His phone buzzed with a text from his private investigator. Jacob Davenport hired Tom Reynolds to investigate the Collins family. Reynolds is good. He'll find everything. Edward smiled, setting down his glass. Perfect. Let Jacob discover the truth about Mary Collins and her poverty, her suffering, her desperate circumstances. Let him feel guilty about his privileged life while his sister and mother struggled. The guilt would make him even more vulnerable to Anna's charms. A soft knock interrupted his thoughts. Come in. His assistant, Margaret, entered with a concerned expression. Mr. Davenport, there's a problem. The Collins girl has been asking questions around town. She worked the Henderson wedding last week and was asking the other staff about you, about Jacob, about your family history. Edward's satisfaction dimmed slightly. Anna was becoming too curious, too active in her investigation. That could complicate things. What kind of questions? Whether Jacob had siblings, what happened to his birth family, how long you've lived in Dallas. Nothing too specific, but enough to make people wonder. Edward moved to his desk, pulling out a leather-bound folder. Inside were dozens of photographs, surveillance shots of Anna and Mary Collins over the years, documentation of their struggles, their small triumphs, their quiet desperation. Schedule another event, he told Margaret. Something intimate, a private dinner for the hospital foundation board. Make sure Anna is specifically requested for the serving staff. Sir, it's time to accelerate the timeline. Jacob and Anna are getting too comfortable with their slow courtship. I want them emotionally invested before they start asking too many dangerous questions. Margaret nodded and left, but Edward was already planning his next moves. He pulled out his phone and dialed a number he hadn't called in months. Robert, it's Edward. I know you're surprised to hear from me, but I have a business proposition that might interest you. Robert Hughes had been living in self-imposed exile in London for the past 5 years, ever since Edward had systematically destroyed his construction business and driven him out of Dallas. But Edward knew Robert had been quietly building a case against him, gathering evidence of financial fraud and worse. I have nothing to say to you, Edward. Robert's voice was cold with hatred. Not even if I told you I have information about Caroline's death. Information that might interest the district attorney. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Caroline Hughes had been Robert's daughter, Edward's late wife, and the key to Edward's current fortune. Her mysterious death during their honeymoon in Cabo had raised questions that were never fully answered. What game are you playing? Robert finally asked. No game. Just a man who's tired of carrying secrets. Meet me next week in Dallas, and I'll tell you everything you want to know about what really happened to Caroline. Edward hung up before Robert could respond. He wasn't actually planning to confess to Caroline's murder. That would be insane. But Robert's return to Dallas would create the perfect chaos to distract from his real plan with Anna and Jacob. Let everyone think Robert was the threat to be worried about, while Edward orchestrated the final act of his revenge. Meanwhile, in a small apartment across town, Anna stood before her bathroom mirror, trying to calm her nerves before her date with Jacob. She'd spent her last $50 on a simple black dress from a consignment shop, and she'd done her makeup 3 times before getting it right. You look beautiful, sweetheart, Mary said from the doorway, but her voice was strained with worry. Mom, are you okay? You sound worse today. Mary's cough had been getting progressively worse over the past month. Despite the new medication Dr. Brooks had prescribed, she was losing weight, and her skin had taken on a grayish pallor that scared Anna. I'm fine, just tired. Mary sat heavily on Anna's bed. Are you sure about tonight? About Jacob Davenport? What do you mean? He's Edward's son. Anna, even if he doesn't know the truth about your connection, getting involved with him is dangerous. Edward has ways of finding out about everything that happens in his family. Anna sat beside her mother, taking her frail hands. Mom, what if this is how we finally get answers? Jacob might know things about Edward, about what really happened. Maybe he can help us understand why Edward kept my picture on that memorial wall. Mary's eyes filled with tears. Or maybe Edward is using Jacob to get to us. Maybe this whole romance is part of some larger plan. The possibility had occurred to Anna, but she'd pushed it away. Her connection with Jacob felt too real, too genuine to be manufactured. When they talked, when he looked at her, she felt like she could see his soul, and he seemed to see hers. I have to try, Mom. I need to know the truth about my brother, about our family, and Jacob. She smiled despite her mother's worried expression. Jacob makes me feel like I'm not alone anymore. Mary squeezed her daughter's hands. Just be careful, sweetheart. Promise me you'll be careful. Anna was about to respond when her phone rang. The caller ID showed Dr. Samuel Brooks. Anna, I need to see you tonight before your date. Sam, I can't. Jacob is picking me up in an hour. Please, it's important. Life-changingly important. Something in his voice made Anna's stomach clench with anxiety. What's wrong? Is it about Mom's test results? Just meet me at the coffee shop. 20 minutes, please, Anna. She looked at her mother's worried face and made a decision. Okay, 20 minutes. Anna arrived at the coffee shop to find Samuel pacing outside, his usually calm demeanor replaced by obvious agitation. Sam, what's going on? You're scaring me. Anna, I've discovered something about Jacob. Something that changes everything. What kind of something? Samuel led her to a corner booth, his hands shaking as he opened a manila folder. I ran some tests, genetic tests. On who? On you. And on Jacob. Samuel's voice was barely a whisper. Anna, Jacob Davenport is your twin brother. The words hit her like a physical blow. The coffee shop seemed to tilt around her, and she gripped the edge of the table to keep from falling. That's impossible. I have the DNA results right here. You're identical twins, Anna. The connection you felt with him, the way you recognized each other, it's because you share the same genetic code. Anna stared at the scientific papers, the charts and numbers that supposedly proved the impossible. But Jacob's last name is Davenport. He was adopted by Edward after his parents died. That's the lie Edward told him. The truth is that Edward took Jacob from your mother when you were both 2 years old. Jacob is your twin brother, and he has no idea. The room was spinning now, and Anna thought she might throw up. All those conversations with Jacob, the way her heart raced when he smiled, the electricity she'd felt when they'd touched. It was all wrong, all horrible, all twisted beyond repair. Oh God, she whispered. I was falling in love with my own brother. Anna, there's more. I think Edward knows. I think he's been orchestrating this whole thing, bringing you two together on purpose. Why would he do that? Samuel's expression was grim. I think he wants to destroy you both, let you fall in love, maybe even become physically involved, and then reveal the truth when it will cause maximum psychological damage. Anna felt tears streaming down her cheeks. I have to cancel the date. I have to never see Jacob again. Anna, wait. Maybe there's another way. Maybe we can use this knowledge to expose Edward instead of letting him use it to destroy you. How? I don't know yet, but we'll figure it out together. I promise. Anna's phone buzzed with a text from Jacob. Looking forward to tonight. You have no idea how much this means to me. The cruelty of it, the innocent affection from a brother who didn't know he was texting his sister, made Anna sob harder. I can't do this, Sam. I can't pretend everything is normal when I know the truth. Then don't pretend. But don't let Edward win either. There has to be a way to save you both. Robert Hughes stepped off the plane at Dallas-Fort Worth International Airport with nothing but a carry-on bag and 23 years of burning rage. The Texas heat hit him like a slap in the face, bringing back memories he'd spent half a decade trying to forget. This city had cost him everything. His daughter, his fortune, his reputation. Now he was back to collect what Edward Davenport owed him. The taxi ride into downtown Dallas took him past landmarks that had once meant something. The construction sites where his company had built its reputation. The country club where Caroline had announced her engagement to Edward. The cemetery where his daughter was buried with lies carved into her headstone. Loving wife, taken too soon by tragic accident. Robert knew better. Caroline hadn't slipped and fallen from that hotel balcony in Cabo San Lucas. Edward had pushed her, just like he'd pushed Robert's company into bankruptcy and pushed Robert himself out of Texas. His phone buzzed with a message from his private investigator in London. Background check on Collins' family complete. Sending files now. This is bigger than we thought. Robert opened the attached documents as the taxi pulled up to his hotel. What he read made his blood pressure spike dangerously high. Mary Collins hadn't just been Edward's secretary. She'd been his mistress, the mother of his children. And Edward had torn those children apart for reasons that went beyond simple cruelty, into the realm of psychological warfare. Son of a bitch, Robert muttered, scrolling through hospital records, birth certificates, and surveillance reports that painted a picture of a man so calculating that even Robert, who'd thought he understood Edward's capacity for evil, was shocked. His phone rang. Hughes. Mr. Hughes, this is Tom Reynolds. I'm a private investigator here in Dallas, and I believe we're working on the same problem. What problem would that be? Bringing down Edward Davenport. I've been hired by his son Jacob to investigate the Collins family situation. Based on what I found, I think you and I should meet. Robert smiled grimly. I'll be right there. An hour later, Robert sat across from Tom Reynolds in a downtown diner that had seen better decades. Reynolds was younger than Robert had expected, maybe 40, with the kind of weathered face that came from years of digging up other people's secrets. Tell me what you know about Caroline's death, Reynolds said without preamble. Edward killed her, pushed her off that balcony during their honeymoon to inherit her portion of the Hughes fortune. But I could never prove it. What if I told you I might have found a way? Robert leaned forward. I'm listening. Reynolds pulled out a thick folder. Edward's been sloppy lately, overconfident. He's been so focused on his Collins family revenge plot that he's left other vulnerabilities exposed. Financial records, witness statements, even some recorded conversations. Recorded by whom? Mary Collins. Turns out she's been documenting Edward's threats and admissions for over 20 years. She's got enough audio evidence to bury him, but she's been too scared to use it. Until now. Her daughter Anna has been stirring up trouble, asking questions, getting too close to the truth. Edward's getting desperate, which makes him dangerous, but it also makes him careless. Robert studied the documents Reynolds had brought, bank records showing suspicious transfers right after Caroline's death, phone logs proving Edward had been in contact with known criminals, medical records suggesting Caroline had been drugged before her fall. This is enough to reopen the investigation into Caroline's death, Robert said. Maybe. But Edward still has friends in high places. Judges who owe him favors, politicians in his pocket. We need something bigger, something so public and devastating that he can't buy his way out of it. What do you suggest? Reynolds smiled. A family reunion. Meanwhile, across town in the Davenport mansion, Jacob was having the worst night of his life. He'd canceled his date with Anna, claiming a family emergency, but the truth was that he couldn't bear to look at her knowing what he now knew. She was his sister, his twin sister, the other half of himself that he'd mourned for 21 years, and Edward had known the entire time. Jacob stood in Edward's study, staring at the memorial wall with new understanding. Those weren't photos of dead children. They were photos of living ones, separated by a monster who'd wanted to watch them suffer. You knew, Jacob said when Edward entered the room. You've always known Anna was alive. Edward's expression didn't change, but Jacob caught the slight tightening around his eyes. I don't know what you're talking about. Cut the shit, Edward. I hired a private investigator. I know about Mary Collins, about the twins, about how you forced her to give me up. I know Anna is my sister. Edward moved to his bar cart, pouring himself a drink with steady hands. And what exactly do you plan to do with this information? Expose you. Destroy you. The same way you destroyed my mother's life. Your mother? Edward laughed coldly. Mary Collins is a whore who tried to trap me into marriage by getting pregnant. I gave her more than she deserved. Jacob felt rage building in his chest like a nuclear reactor approaching meltdown. You tore apart a family. You stole a child. You made me believe my sister was dead. I made you into a Davenport. I gave you wealth, education, opportunities your birth mother could never have provided. You should be grateful. Grateful. Jacob stepped closer, his hands clenched into fists. You sick bastard. You've been watching Anna and me get close. You've been orchestrating it, haven't you? Bringing us together at social events, making sure we'd meet. Edward's smile was pure evil. The heart wants what it wants. Jacob, I simply provided opportunities. You wanted us to fall in love. You wanted us to become involved romantically before we learned the truth. It would have been poetic justice. Mary Collins stole 23 years of my life with her lies and manipulations. I thought it only fair that her children pay the price. Jacob grabbed Edward by the lapels of his expensive suit, slamming him against the wall. You're insane. You're a fucking psychopath. And you're my son in every way that matters, Edward said calmly, even with Jacob's hands around his throat. You have the same killer instinct, the same ruthless ambition. The Collins blood in your veins is weak, but the Davenport training made you strong. Jacob released him, disgusted by the truth in those words. He was like Edward in many ways, cold, calculating, willing to destroy others to get what he wanted. But unlike Edward, he still had a conscience. Where are the recordings? Jacob asked. What recordings? Mary Collins has been recording your threats for 20 years. Where are they? Edward's composure finally cracked slightly. How did you... It doesn't matter how I know. What matters is that you're finished. Those recordings, combined with what I know about your business practices, about Caroline Hughes's death, about everything you've done, it's enough to put you in prison for the rest of your miserable life. You think you can threaten me? Edward straightened his suit jacket. I own half the judges in this city. I have dirt on every politician who matters. And most importantly, I still have the power to destroy Anna Collins with a single phone call. What do you mean? Immigration records, Jacob. Mary Collins has been working under false social security numbers for years to avoid the paper trail that would lead me to her. One call to ICE and Anna loses her nursing school program, maybe even gets deported to whatever country her mother really came from. Jacob felt the walls closing in around him. Even knowing the truth, Edward still held all the cards. But I'm not unreasonable, Edward continued. Play along with my timeline. Let me reveal the truth about your relationship with Anna in my own way, and I'll let them disappear quietly afterward. Mary can take her secrets to the grave, and Anna can start over somewhere far from Dallas. And if I don't, then I destroy all three of you publicly. Completely and permanently. Jacob stared at the man who'd raised him, finally seeing him clearly for the first time. You're not my father. You never were. No, Edward agreed, but I'm the only family you have left. Choose wisely, Jacob. The game isn't over yet. The Davenport mansion had never felt more like a mausoleum than it did on the morning Edward announced his family celebration. Jacob sat at the breakfast table, pushing eggs around his plate, while his adoptive father outlined plans for what he called a long-overdue family gathering. I've invited some old friends, Edward said, buttering his toast with mechanical precision. People who've been important to our family's story over the years. It's time to acknowledge the past and move forward together. Jacob's blood ran cold. What kind of old friends? Mary Collins, for one, and her daughter Anna. I think it's time you met them properly. Don't you? The fork slipped from Jacob's hand, clattering against the china plate. You can't be serious. I'm always serious about family, Jacob. You should know that by now. Edward's smile was predatory. The invitations have already been sent. Saturday evening, 7 o'clock, a small dinner party to celebrate new beginnings. Jacob stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the marble floor. I won't be part of your sick game. Oh, but you will. Because if you don't, I'll make sure Anna Collins suffers consequences she can't even imagine. Immigration fraud is a federal crime. Jacob and her mother's medical treatment depends on charity from a hospital foundation that I control. The threat hung in the air like poison gas. Jacob realized that Edward had been planning this moment for months, maybe years, orchestrating every detail to ensure maximum psychological damage. What do you want from me? Jacob asked through gritted teeth. I want you to be yourself, charming, attentive, everything that made Anna fall for you in the first place. Let her believe this is a romantic gesture, her boyfriend introducing her to his family, and then, when the moment is perfect, I'll reveal the truth about your relationship in front of everyone. You're a monster. I'm a man who believes in justice. Mary Collins humiliated me, tried to trap me, and then dared to keep my children from me. Now she'll watch as her daughter's heart breaks in the most devastating way possible. Jacob left the house without another word, driving aimlessly through Dallas until he found himself at the cemetery where Caroline Hughes was buried. He'd never visited her grave before. Edward had always said it was too painful, too disruptive to their family's healing process. Now Jacob understood that Edward's grief had been as manufactured as everything else about their relationship. He found Caroline's headstone in the family plot, a modest marker that read simply, Caroline Hughes Davenport, beloved wife, taken too soon. Below the inscription, someone had left fresh flowers, white roses that couldn't have been there more than a day. I wondered when you'd finally come here. Jacob spun around to see a man in his 60s approaching, carrying a watering can and wearing work clothes. The groundskeeper, probably. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to disturb. You're Jacob Davenport, the man said. It wasn't a question. You look like her. Around the eyes. Caroline was my daughter. Jacob's world tilted again. You're Robert Hughes. Surprised I'm back in Dallas. So is Edward, I'm sure. But I had some business to finish here. Robert set down the watering can and studied Jacob with sharp blue eyes. Tell me, son, what do you know about how your stepmother died? She fell from a hotel balcony in Mexico. An accident. Robert's laugh was bitter. An accident. Is that what he told you? Caroline was afraid of heights. Jacob wouldn't even go on the second floor of our house without someone with her. The idea that she'd go near a balcony, much less fall from one accidentally, is absurd. What are you saying? I'm saying Edward Davenport murdered my daughter for her inheritance. And I'm saying I can prove it. Jacob felt the ground shifting beneath his feet again. First the truth about Anna. Now this. How many lies had his entire life been built on? I don't understand. If you have proof, why haven't you gone to the police? Because Edward owns half the police force in this city. But that's changing. I've been working with some people, gathering evidence, building a case that even Edward's money can't buy his way out of. What people? Tom Reynolds. For one, the private investigator you hired, and Dr. Samuel Brooks at Parkland Hospital. Turns out we all have reasons to want Edward brought down. Jacob's head was spinning. Dr. Brooks, what does he have to do with any of this? He knows about Anna, about the fact that she's your sister. He's been trying to figure out how to protect her from Edward's games. Jesus Christ, how many people know? More than Edward realizes, which gives us an advantage. Robert picked up the watering can and began tending to Caroline's flowers. The question is, what are you going to do with the information? I don't know. Edward's threatening Anna and her mother if I don't play along with his dinner party charade. Then maybe it's time to beat Edward at his own game. Meanwhile, across town, Anna was having her own crisis. She'd been avoiding Jacob's calls for 3 days, claiming to be sick whenever he tried to see her. But the invitation that arrived that morning had forced her hand. Mr. Edward Davenport requests the pleasure of your company at a family dinner. Saturday evening at 7 o'clock. Please join us for an evening of truth and reconciliation. The words, truth and reconciliation, made Anna's skin crawl. This was Edward's endgame. She was sure of it. We can't go, Anna told her mother, showing her the invitation. It's obviously a trap. Mary Collins looked frailer than ever. Her breathing labored despite the oxygen tank beside her chair. Maybe it's time, sweetheart. Maybe it's time for all the secrets to come out. Mom, you don't understand. Jacob is my brother, my twin brother. If Edward reveals that at this dinner, in front of everyone, it will destroy us both. I know, baby. Anna stared at her mother. You know, how could you possibly know? Mary reached into the drawer of her bedside table and pulled out a small recording device. Because I've been recording every conversation Edward and I have had for 23 years, including the one where he told me exactly what he planned to do to you and Jacob. When did he tell you? Last week he called me, gloating about how you and Jacob had been getting close, how perfect his revenge was going to be. He wanted me to suffer knowing what was coming and being powerless to stop it. Anna felt tears of rage building behind her eyes. That bastard, that sick, twisted bastard. But he made a mistake, Anna. He told me too much. About Caroline Hughes's murder, about the financial fraud, about other crimes he's committed over the years. I have it all on tape. Then we can stop him. We can expose him before he destroys Jacob and me. Mary nodded slowly. but it means fighting back. It means going to that dinner and facing him directly. Are you strong enough for that? Anna thought about Jacob, her brother, the other half of her soul that she'd found and lost in the same moment. She thought about the twisted game Edward had forced them to play, the innocent love that had been turned into something horrible through no fault of their own. "I'm strong enough," she said, "but I'm not going in alone." She pulled out her phone and dialed Samuel's number. "Sam, I need your help. And I think it's time we brought everyone together who has a score to settle with Edward Davenport. What do you have in mind?" "A dinner party, but not the kind Edward is expecting." The Davenport mansion's dining room had never hosted a gathering quite like this one. Crystal chandeliers cast dancing shadows across the mahogany table set for 8, while Edward Davenport surveyed his guests with the satisfaction of a chess master preparing for checkmate. Anna sat beside Jacob, her heart hammering against her ribs as she fought to maintain her composure. 3 days of knowing the truth about their relationship had left her feeling hollowed out, but she'd forced herself to play her role perfectly. Jacob had been doing the same. Their text conversations had been carefully crafted performances, both of them pretending normalcy while drowning in horror. "Thank you all for joining us tonight," Edward said, raising his wine glass. "It's not often that families have the chance to address old wounds and move toward healing." Mary Collins sat at the far end of the table, her oxygen tank discreetly positioned beside her chair. She looked fragile as porcelain, but Anna knew her mother's appearance was deceiving. Hidden in Mary's purse was the recording device that contained 23 years of Edward's admissions. Dr. Samuel Brooks had managed to secure an invitation by claiming he needed to discuss Mary's treatment options with Edward as the hospital's major benefactor. He kept glancing between Anna and Jacob, his medical training probably allowing him to see the stress they were both barely containing. The surprise guest was Robert Hughes, whom Edward had introduced simply as an old business associate. Anna had never heard the name before tonight, but the way Robert stared at Edward with barely controlled hatred suggested their history was complicated and violent. "I'd like to propose a toast," Edward continued, his voice carrying across the ornate dining room. "To family, to the bonds that connect us, even when we don't understand their true nature." Anna's wine glass trembled in her hand. This was it. Edward was beginning his revelation. She caught Jacob's eye and saw her own panic reflected back at her. "Actually, Edward," Robert Hughes interrupted, standing from his chair, "I think I'd like to say a few words first, about family and bonds and truth." Edward's smile faltered slightly. "Robert, perhaps after dinner." "No, I think now is perfect." Robert moved to stand behind his chair, his voice carrying the authority of a man who'd spent decades in boardrooms. "You see, everyone here has been touched by Edward Davenport's unique approach to family relationships, some more devastatingly than others." Anna felt Jacob's hand brush against hers under the table, a gesture of comfort between siblings who didn't yet know how to process their connection. "For instance," Robert continued, "Anna and Jacob here have been developing quite the romance over the past few months. Haven't you? Edward's been very pleased with your progress." "Mr. Hughes," Anna started, but Robert held up a hand. "Please let me finish. You see, Edward has a gift for bringing people together. He brought my daughter Caroline together with himself in marriage. A very profitable marriage, as it turned out, especially after Caroline's unfortunate death during their honeymoon." Edward's face had gone white. "Robert, you're clearly upset about business matters, but this isn't the time or place. On the contrary, this is exactly the time and place." Robert pulled out a manila folder. "Because everything is connected, isn't it, Edward? Caroline's murder, the Collins family situation, your elaborate revenge schemes. It's all part of the same pattern." Mary Collins spoke for the first time, her voice weak but steady. "He killed your daughter for her money, didn't he?" "Among other reasons," Robert confirmed. Caroline had started asking questions about Edward's business practices. She'd discovered some financial irregularities that could have destroyed him, so he eliminated the problem. "This is insane," Edward snapped, but his usual commanding presence was cracking. "You have no proof of any of this." "Actually, I do." Robert opened his folder. "Audio recordings, financial records, witness statements. Caroline called me the night before she died, Edward. She told me she was afraid of you, that she'd found evidence of embezzlement and fraud. I have the entire conversation on tape." Jacob stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the marble floor. "Is that true? Did you kill Caroline?" "Jacob, don't listen to this. Robert has been trying to destroy our family for years." "Answer the question." Jacob's voice echoed through the dining room. "Did you murder your wife?" Edward's mask finally slipped completely, revealing the monster beneath. Caroline was weak. She couldn't understand the bigger picture, couldn't appreciate the empire I was building. She would have destroyed everything out of misplaced moral concerns. The admission hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Anna felt sick, realizing that this was the man who'd torn her family apart, who'd orchestrated her and Jacob's relationship as some twisted form of entertainment. "Jesus Christ," Jacob breathed. "You're a psychopath." "I'm a visionary," Edward snarled. "And speaking of vision, shall we discuss why you're really here tonight, Jacob? Why I arranged for you to meet Anna? Why I've been so supportive of your romantic relationship?" Anna's blood turned to ice. This was the moment she'd been dreading. "Don't," she whispered. But Edward was beyond stopping now. "Anna Collins," Edward said with theatrical flourish. "Meet your twin brother Jacob Collins, born January 15, 2001 at Parkland Hospital in Dallas, Texas. Separated at age 2 when I decided to take Jacob and leave you with your whore of a mother as punishment for her attempts to trap me." The silence that followed was deafening. Anna felt the room spinning around her, even though she'd known this moment was coming. Seeing Jacob's face crumble as the truth hit him was somehow worse than experiencing it herself. "That's impossible," Jacob said weakly. We're twins," Edward confirmed with obvious satisfaction. "Identical twins who've been falling in love with each other for months. Rather poetic, don't you think? The ultimate revenge against Mary Collins, watching her daughter fall for her own brother." Anna doubled over, feeling like she might vomit. All those conversations, all those moments of connection, all those times she'd felt like she'd found her soulmate. It was all wrong, all twisted beyond repair. But then Mary Collins spoke, her voice stronger than it had been all evening. "Actually, Edward, there's something else everyone should know. Something I've been saving for this moment." She pulled out her recording device and placed it on the table. "I've been recording our conversations for 23 years, Edward. Every threat, every admission, every detail of your crimes, including your confession tonight about killing Caroline." Edward lunged for the device, but Robert was faster, grabbing Edward's wrist with surprising strength. "I wouldn't do that if I were you," Robert said calmly. "Dr. Brooks here has been live streaming this entire conversation to the Dallas Police Department. They're probably already on their way." Samuel nodded, holding up his phone. "Detective Martinez from the Fraud Division has been listening to everything. They've been building a case against you for months, Edward. Tonight just gave them everything they needed." Edward looked around the room, finally realizing that he'd been outmaneuvered, his face contorted with rage. "You think you've won? You think this changes anything, those two?" He pointed at Anna and Jacob. "Will never recover from what I've done to them. They'll spend the rest of their lives knowing they fell in love with each other, knowing they wanted things that should never be wanted between siblings. I may go to prison, but I'll have destroyed them completely." "No," Anna said, standing on shaking legs. "You haven't destroyed us. You've freed us." She looked at Jacob, seeing her own pain reflected in his eyes, but also something else. Relief. The horrible secret was finally out. The twisted game was finally over. "We're victims, Jacob. Both of us. What we felt wasn't wrong because we didn't know. What's wrong is what he did to us. What he's done to our entire family." Police sirens wailed in the distance. Growing closer, Edward Davenport's reign of terror was finally coming to an end. 6 months after that devastating dinner party, Anna Collins sat in the witness box of a Dallas courtroom, facing the man who had orchestrated the cruelest manipulation of her life. Edward Davenport looked smaller now in his orange jumpsuit, his silver hair unkempt, and his once commanding presence reduced to the pathetic desperation of a cornered animal. "Miss Collins," the prosecutor continued, "can you describe for the jury the emotional impact of discovering your romantic relationship with Jacob Davenport was actually an incestuous relationship orchestrated by the defendant?" Anna took a deep breath. Drawing strength from the familiar faces in the gallery, Jacob sat in the front row, his support unwavering despite the trauma they'd both endured. Beside him, Dr. Samuel Brooks held her mother's hand as Mary Collins breathed through her oxygen mask, finally strong enough to see justice served. "The defendant didn't just steal my brother from our family," Anna said, her voice steady despite the weight of the words. "He weaponized our natural connection as twins. He turned the love that should have existed between siblings into something shameful and destructive. But what he didn't understand is that love, even manipulated love, can transform into something healing," Edward's lawyer objected. But Anna had said what she needed to say. The jury understood over the past 3 months of testimony. They'd heard audio recordings spanning 2 decades, witnessed financial documents proving massive fraud, and listened to expert testimony about psychological manipulation that would haunt law textbooks for years to come. The most damaging testimony had come from Jacob himself. Edward's own adopted son had methodically dismantled every lie, every manipulation, every crime that had built the Davenport empire. Jacob had also testified about Caroline Hughes's murder, corroborating Robert Hughes's evidence with details only someone living in Edward's house could have known. The defendant, Jacob had told the jury, raised me to be his weapon of revenge against my biological family. He fed me lies about my mother abandoning me, about my sister dying from neglect, about Mary Collins being a gold digger who deserved to suffer. But the truth is that Edward Davenport is a monster who destroyed lives for sport. Now, as the trial entered its final phase, Anna watched Edward's face as the verdict was read. On the charge of first-degree murder in the death of Caroline Hughes, we find the defendant guilty. Edward's shoulders sagged slightly, but his expression remained defiant. On the charges of kidnapping, child endangerment, and parental interference regarding Jacob Collins, we find the defendant guilty. Anna felt tears of relief streaming down her cheeks. Justice was finally being served. On the charges of fraud, embezzlement, and racketeering, we find the defendant guilty. The judge's gavel fell with finality. Edward Davenport, you are sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. As the bailiffs led Edward away, he turned one last time toward Anna and Jacob. "You think this ends it?" he called out, his voice cracking with rage. "You'll never escape what I made you feel for each other. You'll carry that shame forever." But Anna no longer felt shame. She felt pity for a broken man who had confused cruelty with power, who had mistaken manipulation for intelligence. Edward Davenport had tried to destroy her family, but in the end, he had only succeeded in making them stronger. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed with questions about the Davenport twins scandal, but Anna and Jacob ignored them. They had more important business to attend to. Mary Collins was waiting in the back seat of Samuel's car, her condition having deteriorated significantly during the stress of the trial, but her eyes were bright with satisfaction as her children approached. "It's over, Mom," Anna said, taking her mother's frail hand. "He can never hurt us again. My babies," Mary whispered, tears streaming down her cheeks. "My beautiful, strong babies. I'm so sorry for what he put you through. I'm so sorry I couldn't protect you." "You did protect us," Jacob said, kneeling beside the car for the first time since learning the truth about his parentage. He called Mary by the name he should have used all along. "You protected us the only way you could, Mom. You survived, you kept evidence, and you made sure justice would eventually be served." Mary reached out to touch Jacob's face, memorizing features she'd been forced to watch from afar for 21 years. "You grew up so handsome, so strong, just like your father should have been." "My father is dead," Jacob said firmly. "Edward Davenport was never my father. You're my family. You and Anna." The reunion was interrupted by Robert Hughes, who approached with his own news. "The courts have awarded you full restitution from Edward's estate," he told them, "between the money he stole from my family and the funds he embezzled from his business partners. You'll never have to worry about finances again." Anna shook her head. "We don't want his money. It's blood money." "Then donate it," Robert suggested. "Start a foundation to help other families torn apart by domestic abuse. Make Edward's stolen wealth do some good in the world." It was a fitting end to Edward's legacy. His ill-gotten fortune would be used to heal the very type of wounds he'd spent his life creating. 3 months later, Anna stood in the hallway of Parkland Hospital, wearing scrubs instead of a catering uniform for the first time. She'd finally finished her nursing degree, funded by a scholarship program that Jacob had quietly established for students from underprivileged backgrounds. "How does it feel to be saving lives instead of serving champagne?" Samuel asked, joining her at the nurse's station. Over the past months, their friendship had deepened into something more romantic, built on shared trauma and mutual healing. "Like coming home," Anna replied honestly. "Like this is what I was always meant to do." Jacob had found his own path to redemption. He'd dissolved Davenport Industries and used its assets to create affordable housing developments throughout Dallas, focusing on the neighborhoods where he and Anna should have grown up together. He'd also started therapy, working through the psychological damage of Edward's manipulation, with the same methodical approach he'd once applied to business deals. The twins met every Sunday for dinner at Mary's apartment, which had been upgraded to a comfortable space with full-time nursing care. They were still learning how to be siblings instead of potential lovers, still processing the trauma of Edward's manipulation, but they were healing together, the way families should. "How's Mom today?" Jacob asked during one of these visits, hanging his coat on the door of Mary's new living room. "Better," Anna replied, though they both knew Mary's time was limited. The lung disease that had been slowly killing her for years was finally winning, despite the best medical care money could buy. "She's been asking for you to read to her again. She loves hearing your voice." Jacob smiled sadly. He'd been reading to Mary from books of poetry, trying to make up for 21 years of missed bedtime stories. It was a small gesture, but it seemed to bring them both peace. As Anna watched her brother settle into the chair beside their mother's bed, she felt something she'd never experienced before. Complete family love, untainted by manipulation or hidden agendas. Edward Davenport had tried to poison this feeling, had tried to turn it into something shameful and destructive. But love, Anna had learned, was stronger than revenge. Family bonds could survive even the cruelest manipulation. And sometimes, the very worst thing that happened to you could become the catalyst for the best thing, if you were brave enough to choose healing over hatred. Mary Collins died peacefully in her sleep 2 weeks later. Surrounded by both of her children for the first time since they were toddlers, her last words were, "My beautiful twins," spoken with a smile that erased 23 years of separation and sorrow. Edward Davenport's final revenge had become their first true blessing.